Hello and welcome to Rights and Recourse, a program that tackles constitutional, human rights and legal issues, bringing you information and analysis. My name is Dumila Matez. Remember, you can also be part of our discussion today by calling us on our studio line on 011 714 5497 or 5498, or tweeting us at Rights Recourse. Alternatively, email your thoughts to rightsandrecourse@sabc.co.za. A country's foreign policy includes all the policies it develops to pursue its national interests as it interacts with other countries. In recent years, critics of the South African government have accused it of increasingly abandoning its commitments to human rights and democracy and its international engagements. This was demonstrated by the divisive International Criminal Court indictment of Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir. Today on Rights and Recourse, we explore the foreign policy of the Republic of South Africa. Is our foreign policy still guided by the human rights ethos of President Nelson Mandela? But first, let's have a look at this insert.
Your Excellencies, South Africa's foreign policy is premised on the directive in the Freedom Charter, which stipulates that, and I quote, "there shall be peace and friendship," unquote. Informed by this principle and the vision of building a better Africa and a better world, the following guides our diplomatic relations: a commitment to the promotion of human rights and democracy, justice and international law in the conduct of relations between nations, promoting the African agenda in world affairs and economic development through regional and international cooperation in an interdependent world.
That was President Jacob Zuma talking about the South Africa's foreign policy. I think at that stage he was talking to diplomats who represent South Africa all around the world. To discuss today's topic, we are joined in the studio by Ms. Aditi Lal Habdur, Program Manager of the Foreign Policy Program of the South African Institute of International Affairs, and Dr. Danny Titus, former South African Human Rights Commissioner. At our Pretoria studio, we are joined by Ambassador Mxoli Singosi, Chief Operations Officer of the Department of International Relations and Cooperations. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
We speak globally about foreign policy. What is foreign policy?
I don't know. I mean, I think essentially foreign policy would be the sort of rules of engagement on how South Africa or any country would engage with in its relations with the rest of the world, and it's very much driven by our own national interest, and in seeking to expand our national interest, we were engaging with other countries. I think that's how I would very simply.
Let's get it from Ambassador Ngozi. Ambassador Ngozi, I asked a question. It's a very broad question, I think. What is foreign policy? We can't hear Ambassador Ngozi there in Pretoria. Probably we'll have to come back here. We've heard President Zuma making reference to the fact that South Africa's foreign policy is based on human rights and democracy. And this is the policy that was espoused by President Mandela during his term in office. Are we really there?
We've strayed from Mr. Mandela's policy. We've strayed quite a bit. Because with South Africa we have rules, regulation, laws and implementation. When it comes to the implementation side, we are sorely lacking. And when it comes to foreign policy, the ideals that Mr. Mandela held, the context within which he operated, the transition, the reconciliation, that's gone. That's not there anymore. There's now a much stronger nationalistic approach almost. Under Mbeki we had something much more more suave, much more internationalist, much more the statesman, the man who could delegate Aziz Bahar to speak both to the Palestinians and to the Israelis, a man who could dispatch his diplomats in that kind of way. With the current government, we don't see that anymore. And in my view, to a large extent, we have not we've not reached that stage, as you've asked. Because we strayed from Mr. Mandela's policy. Our contexts are completely different. But as Aditi said, it also relates to national interests that are portrayed internationally. And in that we use diplomatic relations, embassies, bilaterals, multilaterals, economics, etc. The president also now mentioned the issue of the African agenda. And that is the context. He spoke also about peace and friendship. He also spoke about interdependence. He also spoke about economic affairs. So within this big basket, we have to conduct our national policies internationally.
Let's go back to Ambassador Ngozi. Ambassador Ngozi, we're sorry. We are terribly sorry there. We couldn't hear you, and that's why we cut away from you. You were giving us your perspective of what foreign policy is.
Well, foreign policy is essentially a mirror of a country's domestic policy. Foreign policy is a comprehensive reflection of all the policies of a country. It's also a reflection of the intent, the interests of a country. It's a reflection of its values and its principles. Since 1994, South Africa has pursued a value-based foreign policy, which also integrates its overall economic interests. In our view, there is no dichotomy between values and interests. The two can be pursued together simultaneously, and they have been pursued indeed since 1994. So there is no truth in the assertion that the South African government has deviated from the post-1994 value-based, normative-based foreign policy. We still continue to pursue that foreign policy. As the latest concrete example of that is the adoption of the resolution at the UN Human Rights Council on the appointment of the expert on the issue of SOGI, sexual orientation and gender identity. South Africa was one of the countries that spoke very much in support of the adoption of this resolution.
Well, I think I picked up somewhere in my research that South Africa actually voted against that.
No. You are talking about an earlier resolution that was discussed in Geneva in June 2016. We abstained on that resolution. We did not vote against that resolution. And simply the reason we abstained was because we felt that we needed something stronger, more than a resolution. We needed a convention. Because you must remember, resolutions of the Human Rights Council are not legally enforceable. But conventions are legally enforceable.
So
yes.
Let me come to something else. We'll come back to you, Ambassador. The Ambassador spoke about value-based foreign policy. What is a value-based foreign policy? In other words, if I want a relationship with a country, I will not open an office in that country, a diplomatic office in that country, if there's no economic spin-offs. Is that what he means?
No, I don't think so. I think what he's referring to really is the core normative framework upon which the new South Africa has been built, which we find, I think, is really sort of enshrined in the Freedom Charter and then also subsequently in the Constitution. And as you've been saying earlier, like the commitment to human rights as a guiding light in our foreign policy was stated by Nelson Mandela in 1993, and is something that has perpetuated through the 20-odd years of South Africa's sort of democratic dispensation. I think what he is talking about essentially is the idea that these normative values drive our international engagement. But we also have to be cognizant of the fact that in foreign policy, it's politics, it's international politics, and is very much driven by realpolitik concerns, which also then play out in engaging with our own national interests. So you can have a commitment to human rights, but you also have to be very cognizant of what is this relationship with a country X, and how is that going to impact on our national interest.
Dr. Titus, the ambassador said South Africa is not veered from a human rights ethos in our foreign policy.
I think in a broad sense one can agree with that. But when it comes to the practical implementation of human rights at a foreign policy level, for example, when we sign international covenants or international conventions, we take upon ourselves the obligation to subject ourselves to what that covenant and convention is saying. Amongst others, we will go back into our country and we will apply the rights and obligations. We will apply that in our national legal system. Then we will come back to the UN when we have to report, and we will tell them exactly what we've done. In South Africa's case, last year in March, when we had to report back on the ICCPR, we discussed it here at your program with the Deputy Minister. It took South Africa 14 years to do so, which means when it comes to living up to our international obligations, we do not do that, sir.
There are many examples like that. Let's
yes.
get a view from the ambassador. There are many examples like that, ambassador. I have another one here. Probably you can answer them both. Our relationship with the BRICS countries, Russia and China. Many people are saying we seem to be doing the bidding for Russia and China at the United Nations.
Well, Dumile, you need to recall that since 1994, we've adopted the principle of universalism in terms of the pursuit of our foreign policy. Simply put, that as South Africa, we shall engage with all countries of the world. To the extent possible, we shall build partnerships for cooperation with all countries of the world. In fact, our constitution enjoins us to build relations that help to develop South Africa, that help to develop Africa, and that help to promote peace in the world. So since 1994, we've engaged with all countries without discriminating against any of the countries. You remember that there was a time when President Mandela was criticized for entertaining relations with Cuba, with Iran, with Syria, and so on. And at some point, there was a president who referred to these countries as the axis of evil. Now, that has been proven very wrong in many respects. So we continue to have relations with all countries, including the BRICS countries. In fact, all countries of the world relate with Brazil, with India, with China, and with Russia.
Let's take Ambassador. Let's take one thing. You say we want to work with all countries. We want our foreign policy to permeate all countries. The question is, what is the relationship between us and Taiwan, for instance?
You will recall that in 1998 we adopted the One China policy. Now, in terms of that policy, our political and diplomatic relations are with Beijing. Yet that policy also allows us to maintain trading relations, to maintain consular relations with Taiwan. So we maintain that policy. And actually, I don't know a single country in the world that does not adopt that policy, the One China policy, based on the modalities that I've just explained. Except, of course, for countries that do not have any political or diplomatic relations with Beijing.
I will come to something else around China. This One China policy, why should it be other people, foreigners, foreign countries, who want to adopt the One China policy when there is a region in that part of the world called Taiwan?
Well, I think it speaks very much to China's own positioning with regards to Taiwan. I'm not an expert on Chinese politics by any stretch of the imagination, but what I am aware of is that there is a sort of a domestic rift in much the same way China has a very specific policy on Tibet and the Dalai Lama.
Welcome to Tibet.
Yeah, sure. So I think that in perpetuating its own hegemonic power in the world, China does place an emphasis on having its allies or having its international relations with countries in the world predicated on an understanding of its own sort of domestic politics. And so, the question is then, how strong is China vis-a-vis Taiwan in order to be able to win out in this battle of ideas.
If you'd like to join us in today's discussion, you can call us on 011 714 5497 or 5498, or alternatively you can tweet us at Rights and Recourse or send us an email on rightsandrecourse@sabc.co.za. Stay with us.
I don't know if I'm going to succeed, but I want you to tell us, who are these 3 people that you have opened corruption charges against at the Brooklyn police station? How senior are they?
Very.
Are these people who are serving in the political office of the executive mayor?
Yes.
Which means they are no longer working for the city now.
Well, I can tell you that one of them is actually finding themselves employed in another municipality.
You are not going to tell us the names?
No, you're not going to get names from me.
Are people still getting free Wi-Fi in Tshwane?
People are still getting free Wi-Fi, and we will actually make it one of the basic services that our residents will get.
Welcome back to Rights and Recourse as we continue to discuss the foreign policy of the Republic of South Africa. Ambassador, with regard to Taiwan and China and South Africa, what is our relationship with Taiwan then?
Well, as I've explained to me, we maintain economic and consular relations with Taiwan. And this is normal. Almost all countries that have got relations with China and Taiwan, they maintain that modality of relations with Taiwan. So we've got very good trade, investment, and consular relations with Taiwan.
So there was nothing wrong with Solin Simang going to Taiwan?
To the One China policy.
So there was nothing wrong with Solin Simang going to Taiwan?
The relations with Taiwan are, of course, not conducted at a political level. They are conducted at a technical level in terms of our engagement with Taiwan.
I quite like that response. They are
yes, but
not a political level.
I understand that, but does it mean you prevent anybody like the DA, for example, or Mr. Simang going to Taiwan? Mustn't necessarily go through the...
No, I don't want to take up the cudgels for the department. The department did explain it is not the department that actually had a problem with Simanga going to Taiwan. Probably the ambassador can tell us.
Well, as I've explained, Dumile, we conduct relations with Taiwan at a technical level. You'll recall that a year ago there was a visit by the Department of Trade and Industry to Taiwan, and that visit was at the level of a chief director. It was at a technical level. We do not engage or conduct relations with Taiwan at the political level.
You see, that's the point. So if someone goes in his capacity as mayor to meet another mayor in the city or in Taiwan, is that prevented? Is that against the ethos? Or was that a political charge that he had to face?
Well, again, I don't want to speak for the department. They did
no, I'm not talking about the department. I'm talking about the broader South African discourse at the time, which was so skewed, and the department is so clear on this. And yet, on the political level, it really went into completely different ramifications.
The question I want to come back to you, Aditi, is does it happen that each president, during his or her term, would pursue a different foreign policy from another?
You're talking specifically in the case of South Africa?
Yeah, exactly,
or,
exactly.
I think that...
And generally too, if you may.
I think that in the case of South Africa, I would argue that you could see very broadly a similar foreign policy across the different presidencies, just different emphases in different places. So, for instance, I would say that, and principally in South Africa, because the ANC has been the ruling party since 1994, there has been that consistency in terms of the values and the norms that drive its foreign policy. But you will see distinctions in style. For instance, Nelson Mandela, as we said, was very much this sort of promoter of international human rights and sort of standing up for that in the international setting. Thabo Mbeki took a very sort of pan-Africanist approach. His emphasis was a lot more on global governance and on creating an African architecture. And he's best known, I think, for the sort of promoting this idea of African Renaissance. Under President Zuma, I think we're seeing a different style in foreign policy, and I think it's actually really encapsulated in the South Africa's National Development Plan, which talks about economic diplomacy as being the main driver of South Africa's foreign policy. So there is a slight shift. And in economic diplomacy, I think what we're seeing as well is a greater emphasis on socioeconomic rights. So when we talk about human rights, generally speaking, it's very topical to think about political and civil rights. So the freedom of speech, the right to free movement, those kinds of things. But socioeconomic rights actually talk about the freedom, the right to housing, the right to healthcare, the right to have a decent job. And I think in focusing on economic diplomacy, this current administration is also reorienting its emphasis towards socioeconomic rights.
The question I want to come to, Dr.
I just want to say that is
Sure.
on a very positive side.
Sure.
And the negative side is what The Economist wrote about in 2015. Where it said about this administration that its diplomacy is immoral and clueless.
Where does that come from?
That comes from the Economist in 2015.
Or The Economist, yes.
When they looked at the discussion document from the ANC for that discussion that was supposed to be held there at the policy conference, where they spoke about things like the fall of the Berlin Wall was not freeing the captive nations of Europe, but it was a regrettable triumph of Western imperialism.
Let's hold that for a moment, because
Yes.
I want to explore this issue. But let's take this call from Owen from Bombela. Owen, good afternoon, and welcome to Rights and Recourse.
Yes, Mtate Mateza. I've got two scenarios. One is Western Sahara, the Sahrawi, and two is the Taiwan that you are talking about. To me, they look strikingly similar. But then again, our stance as South Africa, there seems to be a vast dichotomy there. Can you please elucidate, give me the clear elucidance as to what's the difference between those two scenarios? Thank you.
Well, that's a very direct question. Probably I should try you, Ambassador, around that question of Sahrawi, that's Western Sahara, and Morocco, where South Africa is a complete difference. South Africa even voted against Morocco being readmitted to the AU.
Well, the issue of Western Sahara is a long-standing issue of self-determination. The UN has adopted a number of resolutions urging both parties to conduct a referendum to determine the future of Western Sahara. You'll recall that since Spain left Western Sahara in 1976, there was a vacuum, and that vacuum was immediately filled by Morocco. So the Polisario Front, which is the liberation movement for the people of Western Sahara, had argued strongly and indeed had agitated and waged campaigns for the liberation of Western Sahara from Morocco. And to that effect, there have been several UN resolutions calling for a referendum to be held in Western Sahara. We support that call for a referendum. And indeed, we made that point quite strongly also at the recently concluded summit of the African Union. We now have a scenario in the African Union where Western Sahara and Morocco will sit as equal member states of the African Union. Both have acceded to the Constitutive Act of the African Union, and both are recognized as full members of the African Union. The issue of the status of Western Sahara will be discussed in due course within the framework of the African Union.
That's a very comprehensive response to the issue of Western Sahara, as Erwin was asking. But I wanted to juxtapose the Western Sahara issue with that of Tibet. Is the Western Sahara not similar to Tibet?
The one thing about international relations is that one cannot have consistency. There's always the issue of dealing with each issue on its own merits. The same thing about sanctions, the same thing about human rights. You cannot really draw that clear line of consistency. If it is like that in that country, it must be the same in the other country as well. So that will be my initial response to that.
Let me go back. I'll come back to you, Aditya. I want to go back to the ambassador again. Is how different does it make the issue, does this issue of Sahrawi, Western Sahara and Morocco is to the issue between China and Tibet?
Well, there's a history and there's context to Mile. Tibet and Taiwan and Hong Kong are considered by China to be part of China, to be part of Chinese sovereignty.
Now, do we accept that position because they are considered by China?
China?
Because they are considered by China to be part of China. Do we then accept that? We don't want to accept the issue that Morocco says Western Sahara is part of Morocco. Why don't you accept it? Why do you accept it when it comes to China? We don't accept it when it comes to Morocco.
No, to Mile, states are recognized by international law. Now, in terms of international law, Tibet is an integral part of China. This is international law. We are a rules-based country. We believe in the sanctity of international law. So in terms of international law, it is part and parcel of the sovereignty of China. Hong Kong is different. Hong Kong, you remember, used to be under the suzerainty of the United Kingdom. But there was an agreement between China and the United Kingdom for the United Kingdom to cede Hong Kong to China. And that agreement is in place. So Hong Kong was ceded to China via an agreement. The issue of Taiwan is a long-standing historical issue. It was part of the post-World War II settlement that Taiwan would be considered as a nominally a semi-independent state in terms of international law, but that Beijing would be regarded as the main country with which countries would have political and diplomatic relations.
That's not how Taiwan sees itself, but let's take this call from September in Cape Town. September, good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse.
Hello, hi. Thank you for taking my call. Hi.
Yes, we can hear you.
I just wanted to say, during my time in the UK, The Economist was decidedly Afro-pessimistic and even anti-Mandela. So I'm not surprised by these statements around South Africa. They've never had anything really good to say in the time that I was there for about 5 years. Saying that SA's international intervention is not perfect, but I think it works. At present, it's much more subtle than during Mandela's period. I think we need to remember that Mandela was an international statesman that could pick up the phone, give Bill Clinton, Tony Blair, and even George Bush a dressing down. He was very different from former President Thabo Mbeki and Jacob Zuma. After Mandela, as your guest said, we became more Africa focused. We have accomplished a lot, I think, to be honest with you. I think that between President Mbeki and President Zuma, we actually accomplished more than under President Mandela. During President Thabo Mbeki's presidency, I think we were able to quell most of the wars in Africa. But like I said again, the interventions are not perfect. And like it was more intervention, more subtle. My concern with the actions of ECOWAS, is that if the president in that country had bedded down, we could be faced with a war now. And so I feel that South Africa's stance, international interventions, is much more subtle and actually more diplomatic, than this cowboy style of the U.S. where we go in and we just want to force our way on everybody.
Thank you very much, September.
I'll listen on the radio.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Aditi, to tie up with what September is saying there, the City Press this morning is reporting that South Africa is losing its influence at the African Union as many of the new policy decisions are not going its way.
Well, I think first and foremost, we have to take into recognition that actually the African Union is a multilateral organization. Even under the chairperson Dlamini Zuma, South Africa didn't use that position in order to further its own national interests, its own sort of personal ambitions. It was very focused on trying to sort of, through her tenure, trying to beef up the administration, the bureaucracy. I mean, I'm not saying that her time there was perfect. I think that there's a lot of criticism around what she was able to do. But if you look again at her key successes, it really is the Agenda 2063. It's a very Pan-Africanist vision. It's a roadmap for the development of Africa. So she was engaging on that level. I wouldn't be able to say that, I think that South Africa, and in response to your caller, sort of saying that South Africa's diplomacy style is a little bit more subtle. I agree with that, and I mean he's very valid in saying that the situation in Gambia was a recipe for failure potentially had Gambia resisted, but the South African model of non-intervention, I think, arguably puts it in a situation where it seems to be inactive, or it seems to be on the side of tyrannical governments. So right now we have a situation in the DRC that South Africa has taken a step back from. You don't see South Africa being vocal about it. You don't see them engaging through SADC on the DRC. Again, we know the criticisms leveled at South Africa on Zimbabwe, and the perpetuation of Mugabe in Zimbabwe speaks to that. It really opens the country up to a lot of criticism that I think that we need to think about how we recalibrate as a country.
Let's go back to the ambassador. Ambassador, again, I'm coming to you. This is the question raised by Aditi here, and the City Press report that I quoted, and what September was saying. It would seem to me, if we are standing for, as the President was saying earlier, for democracy and peace in Africa, we should have made our voice heard much earlier in the case of the Gambia. We didn't.
Well, Dumile, we remain committed to the African agenda. And in this regard, with respect to the specific case of the Gambia, we were one of the few countries that condemned the decision, the latter decision by the outgone president of Gambia, Yahya Jammeh, to turn back on his word and not to accept the outcome of a freely held ballot that had determined that President Barrow is the winner of that presidential election. So evidence is there to prove that we had maintained a very consistent position in line with the values and principles of our constitution, the values and principles enshrined in our foreign policy on the promotion of democracy and good governance.
It doesn't
and
seem...
actually,
you want to add?
Coming to the question of South Africa's influence waning on the continent, that is not true. We act in concert with others on the continent. We act within the framework of SADC, we act within the framework of the African Union, and we seek to promote the collective interests of all the African countries. We remain committed to the integration of the SADC region, And to that effect, this year we'll be taking over the chairpersonship of SADC, and we're going to intensify the program around the economic integration of the SADC region through the Free Trade Area Agreement. We remain committed
Ambassador, my apologies for interrupting you, but Ambassador, I am happy that you are going to be taking the seat, South Africa will be taking the chairmanship seat of SADC, but you sit with a problem right within your borders in Lesotho, a small little problem compared to that of the Gambia. We can't solve this problem in Lesotho. What is our influence then? What are we doing?
Well, SADC is seized with the issue of the Kingdom of Lesotho, and we are happy with the progress that has been made under the mediation of His Excellency, the Deputy President of the Republic, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa, who remains constantly in touch with all the role players in Lesotho with the view to ensuring that we find a durable political solution to the issue of Lesotho.
Let's take this issue of Lesotho further. Lesotho, SADC has been busy with this issue of Lesotho for more than 5 years, for as long as I can remember. And it is nowhere near to... I saw pictures of people being shot at the border by police last week.
I think the broader issue that you raised around losing our influence on the continent is something we have to watch very carefully. I think your institute came up with a very, I won't say superficial, but a study in terms of just asking people on the continent, officials, senior people, what are their perceptions of South Africa? And it's amazing what came out of there, is that South Africa is seen as an Africa on its own. South Africa is seen as not part of the continent. South Africa is claiming to represent Africa through BRICS, but whatever happens at BRICS stays within South Africa. That is the perception on the other side, on the other parts of the continent. Some other points, the issue of xenophobia they raised as well. They see South Africa as the xenophobic country still, in terms of what was done to citizens. The issue of Abacha, the issue of the African lobby. You remember that Mr. Mandela was quite successful in his lobbying around Sani Abacha. But now the statement was made afterwards, but he was not consulting the African lobby. When the South African Foreign Affairs, DIRCO, took up this LGBTI matter in Geneva against Russia the first time, then we were also really, really impressed with what they did. They did that against the African lobby, who did not support that. I think the representative from Ghana said, you are not representing your country here, South Africa.
But
so the point
Dr.
I'm trying to
Titus,
make is we are losing that kind of influence that you're talking about.
Dr. Titus, the questions I want to raise around this issue, I know we said earlier it is a broad topic, it is, but President Mandela put his foot down. He actually succeeded in getting Nigeria suspended from the Commonwealth. And Nigeria, as a result, did not come to the African Nations Cup, which we hosted in 1996. And we haven't seen something like that since then, where somebody says, I put my foot down for wrong and right. Even in the Congo, when Mobutu Sese Seko was running that country, if it was his fiefdom, it was President Mandela when they got him on a ship, and Kabila, and they spoke, and that issue was resolved.
But that's
we
the
don't
reality.
have that influence.
Exactly, that's the reality. We will never go back to that. We are now in a complete different context, a different environment, a different political environment. We have a president that is not close to the bootstraps of Mr. Mandela, and that is our concern. What does that mean for our foreign policy? What does it mean for our presence on the African
I want to go
continent?
to the ambassador, but let's start with you, Aditi. Aditi, first of all, this thing you did in Africa, asking what do they think about survey you did.
Yes, as Mr. Titus was saying, it was a perception survey, and what we did was we actually spoke to the diplomatic community based in Pretoria. You know that Pretoria is one of the biggest diplomatic communities in the world. So we actually spoke to diplomats from all over Africa, from the Europe, North America, and so on, and to get a sense from them on how they see South Africa's foreign policy. And very much it was a case of getting that sense of there's, under the Mandela administration, there was a very clear sort of, like I said, what we've been saying, this human rights sort of agenda. Under President Mbeki, there was a very clear sense of what South Africa's drive was. And you could see that sort of growing confusion amongst the diplomatic community to say, now, what is South Africa? Now we're not sure where South Africa sits on a number of issues. And actually, one of the recommendations that come from that report is to DIRCO, is to say you need to beef up your communication on issues. So you can't just say we voted X at the UN Security Council. You need to be able to say we voted X and this is why. So that they then as well are better understood amongst the sort of general population. But I do want to add one more thing, and that was actually regarding the whole issue of Sani Abacha and President Mandela. And I think, the way you say, I don't know if you intend to do this, but you seem to be saying this as a success for President Mandela. In fact, it wasn't. In fact, it actually really tested his soft power in the world, because the consequence of that decision of him standing up was that South Africa was really sort of excluded from a lot of politics in Africa. And it took a lot of diplomatic wrangling on the part of former Deputy President Mbeki at that time to sort of reintegrate South Africa back into the Africa. And that is why the Sani Abacha example is the only example you will find of South Africa standing up and speaking so vociferously against other African countries. Since then, we're very, very careful about that, and it's simply because there is this fear that we're going to be excluded again from the rest of Africa. The thing is it's a very delicate balancing act that South Africa does in trying to portray a leadership role in the African continent, but also being seen as a brother in arms, or they're having that solidarity sort of a narrative run through the way in which we engage with Africa.
Ambassador, I'll come to you. I just want to take this call from Jeffrey from Mpumalanga. Jeffrey, good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse.
Thanks, Mr. Matez. I think that it may not be correct to compare precedents. Sometimes we need to appreciate that when democracy is maturing, you may get certain things right and get certain things wrong. But I'm just worried about the synergy in the spheres of government. If I heard your guest, Ambassador, correctly, he said that we may conduct relations with Taiwan at a bureaucratic or technical level, but not maybe at a political and an executive level. But Mr. Msimang is an executive mayor, he's a politician, So if this situation is not arrested quickly, it may embarrass us at an international level. That now it's like we are a federal state. Anybody can just visit the country and go and represent the country, like what you see on Mr. Msimang and Msimaiman as well. I'm worried about that angle, that having provinces, does it mean that we are a federal state? Anybody who is representing a country at a local level or provincial level can visit a country? If you may just ask.
Well, we've seen those visits, Jeffrey, from other mayors, from councillors run by the ANC, and I think let's leave that to the ambassador to respond to. Ambassador, the other question I want to ask you, tying up with the one Jeffrey is asking, is what is the role of diplomats in foreign service? When I go to China, for instance, what role would the ambassador have to do for me when I arrive there? It doesn't matter whether I belong to the EFF or the DA or what, because I believe the diplomat should not be a political animal, if I may say so.
Well, thanks, Dumile. Dumile, if I may just weigh in on the earlier discussion around South Africa's influence and role on the continent. In fact, we have succeeded in resolving three most recent conflicts on the continent. The one in Burundi, which was mediated by President Zuma in his capacity then as deputy president, which ushered in the first ever democratic elections in that country since independence. So that is a major diplomatic contribution by South Africa. And of course, DRC will remain seized with that file of the DRC. We've contributed to the stabilization of the most conflict-ridden part of Central Africa, and that is the eastern part of the DRC. And of course, we've also contributed to the resolution of the crisis in Madagascar, and now recently in Lesotho. So these four stand out as four major contributions that we've made under the presidency of President Jacob Zuma. Now, Coming to the question you've raised around the role of our embassies are there to promote South Africa's interests in the host country. And our interests are diversified. They are commercial, they are political, they are scientific, they are cultural. We also promote tourism, we promote people-to-people interaction. So all these wide spectrum of issues are issues that are handled by our embassies. Now, as a South African who visits any of the countries where we've got an embassy, we would like to encourage you to register with our embassy. There is a registration system that we call the ROSA, Register of South Africans. So we'd like to know when South Africans visit, would like to have their details so that, God forbid, when an incident happens, we can be there to help and assist and provide consular services.
The other question for me, the ambassador mentioned a number of countries, and when he was mentioning those countries, Burundi, DRC, Lesotho, we all shook our heads because there's still turmoil in those countries.
Well, that is the issue, you know, that you may come in a country, you may start as President Zuma tried to, and then obviously there may be some gains, short-term gains, but the long-term picture must be brought into consideration. And that is where we need to realize that as a national state, we have our limitations. That is why we need international relations. That's why we need partnerships. That's why we need to operate at multifora. So yeah, while that may be that kind of victory that it may sound like, we know the real world looks different.
I think I would add to that it's certainly the case that majority of countries that are post-conflict countries, there is a significant risk of backsliding into reverting back into conflict, and certainly the case of I'm most familiar with Burundi and the DRC, and certainly that is the case in these two countries. It's not too obviously there's not a fault on the side of the South African mediation process that took place in the early 2000s in these countries, but the question is, now that you're seeing a significant backslide, now that you're seeing a significant reversion to violent conflict, and in the case of Burundi, for instance, where Pierre Nkurunziza has sought to extend his constitutional term limit, where is the South African government voice in this? Where is the South African intervention in this? And even if it's a case of not sort of deploying troops, where is the statement to say we don't agree with this, or this is the South African position on this? It's largely silent. And for me, I think I've been doing a lot of work recently on the DRC. It's very patently obvious that South Africa is engaged in, as Ambassador mentioned, the peacekeeping interventions in Goma through the Forced Intervention Brigade. It's actually a revolutionary intervention in that it's really made huge leaps in bringing about peace to that region. But with the current crisis in the DRC, with this up until December the 31st, it seemed very likely that President Kabila was going to extend his stay, and by and large he has he's bought himself an additional sort of year. In this time, we haven't heard anything from even from SADC. To say, to comment on the crisis in the DRC.
Let's hear from the ambassador. Ambassador, you heard all of those concerns, because the countries you are mentioning, we are aware that there was work done on it when President Zuma was deputy president, but still those countries, especially with a country within our borders like Lesotho, still deep in turmoil.
Well, Dumile, part of our objective when we engage in preventative diplomacy, and particularly our mediation effort, part of the objective, of course, is to build capacity amongst the parties that are in conflict, to build the capacity so that they can resolve problems on their own without a third party. And indeed, in the DRC, we've been able to do that, because following a very protracted period of negotiation, the so-called inter-Congolese dialogue, we're able to ensure that elections were held in the DRC for the first time in 2006.
Is it the inter-Congolese dialogue that was at South City?
Yes, these were the first democratic elections that were held in the DRC following the protracted negotiations under the mediation of the then President Mbeki in Sun City. Now, the Congolese have got the capacity to resolve their problems, and they've proven that by initiating an intra-Congolese dialogue, a dialogue amongst themselves, which was mediated by the Catholic Church and other faith-based organizations in the DRC, which resulted in an agreement that was signed before the end of 2016. Now, we have to accompany and help the DRC to realize the implementation of this agreement. With regards to Burundi, Burundi issue is handled by the East African community. In terms of the African Union's doctrine on African solutions for African problems, regional economic communities have got a responsibility to ensure that they implement mediation processes and they find political solutions to specific conflicts within their countries of their jurisdiction. Burundi issue is handled by the East African community, and the East African community has determined that the outcomes of the Burundi process, as well as the elections that were held, are indeed in line with the Arusha Agreement and with the Burundian constitution.
Well, let's take this last call from Victor in Limpopo. Victor, good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse. Hello, Victor, are you there?
Good afternoon.
Yes, Victor.
I'm so disappointed today. You know, the dooms of analysts today. Negativity is all what they're after.
Victor, my apology, Victor. These are my Victor, my apologies.
Taiwan,
these are my guests. Victor, sorry, can we cut Victor off? We cannot have people. Let me come back to an issue. I wanted us to talk about the time we have quickly. Let's talk about the South Africa's withdrawal from the International Criminal Court. We follow. I read a document from the ANC from their policy statement. It says we believe in international law. What is it that we mean when we say we believe in international law?
I think that is lip service, Mr. Mateza, because we have the matter now before the courts. We have the judgment already against the South African government of Justice Mlambo. What we see very clearly is that there is a choice, one for diplomatic relations, as the Minister of Justice indicated. On the other hand, the issue of victims of human rights violations, of genocide, of allowing perpetrators to roam the continent and even to come into this country and leaving this country with impunity. And those are the broader issues. And not so much that this is the African countries that are targeted. The African countries ask for it. That is how the International Criminal Court works. You request them to come and investigate. So those kinds of arguments, I think we need to have the final outcome still. But at the moment, and also you see that there are other African countries that are saying, sorry, we are not participating in this, Nigeria amongst others. So this is not a cut and dried outcome, certainly not.
Aditi?
Well, I think I was actually in Ethiopia last week and I was attending a conference, and one of the issues was on transitional justice, and that the issue of the ICC withdrawal came out. And actually he's the head of the African courts on human and people's rights. He was saying quite unequivocally that that this court, the African court, was actually instituted in order to facilitate or to mirror the work of the ICC. Now, you'll recall that part of the withdrawal process is to actually say that is to move all of these issues to capacitate the Africa Court. And the only sort of area where it differs is the Africa Court doesn't look at sitting heads of state. So I think that that speaks to a very specific political decision on the part of South Africa and obviously the continent.
Mr. Ambassador, we'll give the final words to you and respond to all of these issues that have been raised here by my guests in Johannesburg.
Well, Dumile, we do hope that the statutes of the African Court will be reviewed to enable it to fill the void that would be created by the eventual withdrawal of African countries from the ICC. Now, the ICC was conceived as an international instrument that would deal with issues of impunity. When the ICC was conceived, it was hoped that the majority of the countries, member states of the UN, would join the ICC, would sign the Rome Statute. But this has not been the case. In fact, 3 of the permanent members of the Security Council are not signatories of the Rome Statute. The US actually withdrew from the Rome Statute. Now, this is a big problem, Dumile. You can't have a situation where the Security Council takes a decision on the referral of cases to the ICC or the deferral of cases from being heard by the ICC, when the very same members of the Security Council, the P5 category that is, are not signatories of the Rome Statute. This is a big problem. And that is one of the fundamental reasons why African countries have overwhelmingly taken a decision to disengage from the ICC.
Well, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. It's been a riveting discussion. We can have this discussion again. I think we are going to have a separate discussion on the ICC withdrawals and what the African continent is saying about that. This has been Right and Recourse. This program is repeated on Wednesday morning at 5 o'clock. Please do continue to tweet us on Right and Recourse and send us your emails to rightandrecourse@sabc.co.za. The views expressed on this program are not necessarily those of the SABC or Right and Recourse. From all of us in the studio, thanks to our guests and good afternoon.
Proceedings of the Fees Commission has once again been disrupted.
We as a university do not feel that fee-free higher education currently is feasible.
This is a Mickey Mouse